Hello, everyone. It's Frances Widdowson here. Welcome to the Rational Space Disputations. With me today, my guest is Mark Crawford. Welcome to the Rational Space Disputations, Mark.
Hello, Francis. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and Mark is an associate professor of political science at Athabasca University, where he has been on the full-time faculty since 2007. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of British Columbia and a doctorate from Oxford University, as well as 5 years' experience in both the provincial and federal public sectors. While at Athabasca, he has taught courses in Canadian politics, Indigenous politics, and democratic theory, and has researched and published in the areas of trade policy, health policy, Canadian politics, and political theory. His articles have appeared in Society and Policy, Healthcare Policy, and Review of Policy Research, the Asia Pacific Journal, among other publications. So, we have quite a lot of common ground or common interests, Mark.
Mhm.
But before we get into looking at a number of areas of our sort of common interest, I thought maybe you could just tell our guests a little bit about your background and what your current interests are and so on.
I guess I've had kind of two two foci, well, two or three foci recently in terms of research interests. But um, in terms of how I got there, well, I remember as an undergraduate a long time ago, the Charter of Rights was the new thing. And so I kind of looked at free speech, and I ended up writing a bit about free speech in my graduate work. And I hit upon the idea that maybe free speech is a public good and has some of the properties of a public good, and um, that could maybe help to shape one's analysis of it. That is something that tends to be undersupplied unless some special effort is made by government, legislative or legal or otherwise. Maybe a bit of a rationale for the constitutional defense of it.
Mm.
Um, and well, then of course I went on and did other things. Trade policy was another focus. So after I've written something about free speech, I might get back into trade policy because now all of a sudden tariffs are on everybody's tongue. Thank you, Donald. But I guess between those two things, I mean, also some interest in Indigenous politics because I was given the job of being the tutor in Indigenous politics at Athabasca. I guess because of my constitutional background,
Mm.
we didn't have any actual Indigenous specialists like yourself or
Mm.
Indigenous faculty members in political science at that time.
Mm.
So it fell to me to teach that course. And so that kind of explains that how I got that job. And of course, it's the intersection between, free speech and Indigenous academic freedom and Indigenous politics that made me interested in your case.
Mm.
Um, and I do sometimes wonder, just based on my own experience, well, is this only a problem because of the special sensitivity of Indigenous people in Canada? Or is there a bigger, broader problem? But then, certainly a lot of people, particularly in the light of the recent Palestinian protests and so forth, have pointed out that it's a broader problem. And of course, many other people have long pointed out that it's a problem. I mean, I mean, the people who've spoken on this, uh, John McWhorter and um, Steven Pinker and well, yeah, numerous people. Susan Nyman and so forth. So I'm kind of interested in this issue of academic freedom. Um, and I think the history of the subject of academic freedom is such that it tends to it seems to me it tends to flare up every 10 or 15 years in terms of whatever the latest wave of values or policies that conflict with academic freedom are.
Mm,
And then the response to that has to be recalibrated and an institutional balance found and a possible policy response found.
mm,
So now I've skipped over my interest in Japanese politics, but that might seem like kind of a digression right now. So
yes. And you were at Oxford. You did your PhD at Oxford.
yeah, yeah.
And when did you do your PhD?
That would have been like the early 90s.
Okay. And
And
you got your PhD at the end, like the late 90s?
uh well it was yeah, it was 97, I guess was when I
97. Yeah, that's when I started.
yeah.
Yeah, I did some government work as well. So and is there what made you decide to go to, oh, well, I guess that's kind of the jewel in the crown a little bit,
Yeah.
Oxford. So how did you happen to be able to go to Oxford University?
Well, I wish I could say I had some specific goal in mind because then I would have achieved it maybe.
It
No, I
just
mean,
just decided, why not?
yeah, I
Why
mean,
not me?
Oxford was the place to go,
Yeah,
and I had good references from UBC,
yeah.
and the people, and also from UVic because I spent my first year at UVic,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'd been uh, a research assistant at the BC project there, so I got
Okay.
to know Walter Young. So I got good references from Alan Cairns and Walter Young, who were these Oxford men, right? So I mean, wasn't hard to portray myself
Yeah.
as somebody who was well suited to go to Oxford. So I did. So
Yeah, I was at UVic and UBC as well. Not at the political science department at UBC. I was in doing the sciences at UBC. But I spent quite a long time at UVic. But I didn't. Walter Young had died by the time I was
yeah,
there. So I never met him. But that was a. And I'm just thinking. Did you know? Have you noticed? Because this is something that often is good to talk to people who were doing academic work in the 80s and the 90s. Did you notice things were a lot different in at that time than they are now?
yeah, I would say so. I
And
mean,
how were they different?
well, in some ways, it's kind of in some ways it's completely turned around like 180 degrees. I mean, I remember when I first set foot on UBC campus,
Mhm.
we're talking early 80s, really.
Yeah.
Um, the I was really impressed by just the diversity of people and opinions and political beliefs and stuff, and said, "Oh wow, there's a Maoist club, and a gay and lesbian club. I mean that wasn't common. Even at UVic, but just before that, um, you didn't notice those sorts of things. It was
And you were
just
at UVic first, and then you
I
moved
was
to
just there for 1 year, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, yeah. So UBC was kind of yeah. I mean, this great diversity of people, but now that's not to say free speech was never an issue.
Mm.
In fact, I remember the um, the somewhat conservative elements in. I was on the student council there, and the somewhat conservative elements were kind of cracking down on the UBC, the student paper, and
Yeah.
wanted to put their own insert in there. And I remember um, somebody on the executive making the comment that oh uh, that um, some women's organization wasn't exactly representative or something like that, and I didn't really realize what they were referring to, but maybe perhaps the sexual orientation of the people, but
They are.
yeah. So I mean, yeah. But anyway, there was some, yeah. So,
Did
but
you
I
ever
mean,
feel? I
I
guess
think
the question is,
I
did you
think I
ever
was a
feel?
bigger
Did you
part.
ever feel that you were constrained? So when you were a student, did you ever feel I shouldn't raise this point, or like there's going to be trouble if I enter into this area?
No, no. I mean, not for me personally, not the
Yeah,
way I
I didn't
was
even think
then.
this is kind of what I think is kind of I never and you Vic, interestingly, just to bring up that example, and also UBC, I think that followed
Mhm.
quite soon after. In 1992, when I left UVic, it was just having a huge blow up about it was what we now call wokeism, but it was an early manifestation of it in the gender feminist kind of area,
Right.
and
Was
that
that?
happened right as I was leaving, and then
Yeah.
UBC followed quite soon afterwards on a similar kind of blow
Well,
up.
I was in touch with some of the faculty back then,
Yeah.
having been a research assistant in the summers. But was that the chilly climate that you
Yes.
referred to? Yeah.
Yes. Summer
Yeah. I mean,
Broadrib,
that,
I'm naming
yeah.
names. Summer Broadrib was the major instigator of that whole thing, and she's just disappeared. I don't know what happened to her. But I remember at the time, because I was kind of flirting with postmodernism at that time, because I hadn't yet entered into Northwest Territories and so on.
Sure.
And I was kind of, I didn't really know what to think about it. And I thought, well, there's sometimes maybe there's problems. But I hadn't really kind of interrogated what was going on there. So it was all a bit kind of surprising. And I didn't really know what to think about it. But that was kind of the first taste of what was to come, uh,
Yeah. But as
in
a ringside observer, you mentioned Foucault. I mean, so as a ringside kind of observer in retrospect, I mean, do you think that actual body of theory actually kind of contributed
yes.
to
Yes,
this?
it's at the roots of it. It's at the roots
Yeah,
because what it does is it knocks out the notion of reason and evidence as a way of trying to reach some kind of common understanding. So
yeah,
when you knock that out, you allow these psychopathic kinds of individuals to come in and basically try to grab power from others, and it's very, very difficult to stop them if you've knocked out the sort of the Enlightenment principles. And I saw that. I should go back. I did revisit that a little bit in this manuscript on the Woke Academy that I've been doing for the last number of
yeah.
years, and that was kind of like the opening to my women's studies chapter, because that was the feminist kind of side of it. But yeah, so it definitely that was kind of, but it hadn't taken over everything at that point. It was just a sort of a side kind of area that was trying to assert power, but the men in the department were seriously off balance by the whole thing, and that's kind of what happens, is that they want to be feminist in their outlook,
Yeah.
and that makes them susceptible to this use of compassion to as part of this power struggle that goes on. So that's interesting. And Indigenous policy, you you became interested in Indigenous policy at some point.
I guess I'm just trying to think now. Well, I was a minister. One thing I didn't mention in terms of autobiography is that I grew up in Williams Lake, about 5 miles away from a couple of First Nations reserves
Yeah.
in a town that is a service center to all the Indigenous communities around it. I mean, one of the reasons I'm glad that my parents moved us up there in 1973 was that we were closer to the primary industries and closer to the First Nations people and closer to the land
mm,
and the resource industries, of course, that were the real historic basis of the economy.
mm,
So yeah, I feel like I got some exposure there, but also later, for a better part of a year anyway, I was a ministerial assistant to David Zernhelt, who was the Minister of Forests in the Glenn Clark government.
mm,
And that was one of the 5 years I spent in the public sector.
mm.
And of course, that both in his constituency work and in his in the formulation of land use plans and jobs and timber accord and everything. There's always an Indigenous dimension in these things.
Yep.
Um, and so that was some exposure to Indigenous policy there, and certainly the NDP in the 90s um, did, through the land use plans and the treaty process, did help to bring BC, out of the war in the forest with respect to forest policy and also all those road blockades and stuff that the First Nations were using in the 80s
Yep.
as an instrument of protest. So I think the NDP probably deserves credit, I guess, for transmuting those conflicts into something more legal and peaceable, I guess.
Mm.
Uh, and
Yeah. Well,
if it, I
this is
probably
it's an interesting question as to what it's kind of that's when they sort of were able to give legal, throw legal bones out, and then now we've got like all sorts of conflicts that are rumbling. Not. I don't think they've been violent, particularly, is my
yeah.
general sense, but the legal system has kind of ensnared everything into this
Yeah.
situation.
Um, yeah. I mean, the way the goalposts have kept moving with each successive leading court decision.
Yeah,
Um, Now, what year was Delgamuukw? That was a big one.
yeah.
That
I
was still
believe
in the
that
90s.
was 97, maybe 97. Or was it?
Yeah. So
I
that,
think 97.
yeah, that was actually, um,
Catherine. That was the original one.
yeah,
That was the about face. So we had the, life it was nasty, Brutus, and short. That was McEachern's view.
yeah,
Then it was like, this is outrageous. This is just should not these words should never be uttered. And then we went like, okay, there was title, there was all these things, which that this is a huge contested area now that cannot be really argued about. Like you can't
yeah,
really go in there anymore. Um, you could in the 90s and the 2000s, but
yeah,
then starting in the last decade, you really sense that this was going to be dangerous. This was going to be a very
yeah.
dangerous
I think
argument.
Delgamuukw happened around the end of my time working for Zernhelt.
Mm,
And yeah, and it really sent expectations in the First Nations community soaring. So,
yeah.
um, but as you say, where does it end? You know,
Yeah, well, it ends in more legal
and
disputes.
and then the
Yeah.
Chilcotin case,
Yeah.
So
Oh. Anyway, and Williams Lake. So the residential school there, Will Sellers, is his last name. Are you familiar with that situation?
oh, Bev Sellers.
Willie Sellers, is that the
Oh, Willie Sellers might be her yeah, Bev Sellers and Willie Sellers are sort of the power couple of the not the Sugarcane, but it's funny, I'm the Zatsul First Nation, which we
Yeah.
used to call Deep Creek, I think. Anyway.
Well, sugarcane is related now because of this quote unquote document. Have you heard about this situation?
Yes, I haven't seen it. I know that Michelle Sterling has written a critique of it.
No.
Um,
And a documentary.
um, now I have some friends in Williams Lake who, well, have approved the fact that was it nominated for Academy Award or something? Um,
Yes, it
so
is actually
everybody's
contended.
very happy and
Yeah.
proud about that, without really knowing the content of it. But
Well, I'm on a research group with about 25 people.
uh-huh,
The most important being Nina Green, who is just an unbelievable researcher who has
yeah,
done so much work. And she has taught me a lot because, I wasn't really, I was more of a theorist and not so much of a researcher. So I didn't really kind of understand the mechanics of what you needed to do as a historian to make sure that your work was robust. And that's pretty much what Nina does. Is she goes and ferrets out all these primary documents, things like birth certificates, death certificates,
yeah,
all the interviews with people, and so on. And so, um, based upon Nina's research, and pretty much every member of our research group, it's Nina who gets the starts into it, and then everyone kind of joins in and starts getting does more on top of that. And that's what I believe what happened in the case of the sugarcane stuff, because Nina ferreted out all this information, which was, for people who are unfamiliar with this case, St. Joseph's was the residential school. There was a woman, Archie is her last name, I believe. And she was had a baby, and she abandoned the baby in a pile that was going to be incinerated. It was the woman who did it, the
yeah,
Indigenous woman, and she it was found that some night watchman or something came back and found this baby in this pile and saved the baby. And the woman was charged and was jailed for her abandonment, etc. And at the somewhere about the same time, there's a priest who had a child with a worker, not a student, but a worker. But he was a priest, so
yeah,
priests are not supposed to be, doing that, and it was inappropriate and blah blah blah.
yeah,
And so he that was part of it, and then he got some complaints laid against him for sexual assault, but it never really went the whole distance in terms of that. And he's always proclaimed that was never, he did have this child with this woman, but that was consensual thing. And the stuff about the sexual assault was not the case.
yeah,
And then there was a healing circle held about that. So those two issues, the priest and his child that he had with this woman, got kind of conflated with this baby that was left in the uh, pile to be incinerated by its mother. And now this so-called documentary is arguing that priests were incinerating babies.
okay. Um,
And that's amazing that this is kind of going forward as some valid
uh,
historical kind of account.
now, is this this sort of thing about graves there as well as there is at Kamloops?
Yes.
I mean,
So
but they must have a record of all the students who were admitted, and then some kind of
uh I don't
or attended.
sometimes not, because of records being burnt and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So it's not complete. And I don't know. This is where Nina really, like, where she excels, and where I unfortunately am not. This
yeah,
is not the kind of work that I'm really adept at. But
yeah,
still, sometimes you have complete records, sometimes you don't. But usually you don't. You're missing some. And this bring my the one case which I got some much more familiarity with in that regard is the Kamloops records, which you did raise before in the talks that we're doing on
yeah,
Leah Gazan and stuff. Um, 51. There's 51 children, records of 51 children who died at the Kamloops, or are recorded to have died, who were students of the school. And there were 51, but it turned out it was 49 because there was a double counting of two. So we have 49, and then death certificates were found, which doesn't mean that there's the other death certificates are missing. The reason why we have those death certificates is because they were available more publicly than the ones that we can't get a hold of, which you would have to be a relative to request that from vital statistics. So we need the relatives of those, whoever those people are who are saying their children had died, to go and get those records. And then we'd have a complete set, but we don't. We just have, I think it's about 40 of those death certificates. And then we found out the 50, this is Nina, the 40, 20s, about half of them, the children died at either in hospital or on their home reserves, and all these things, in accidents and so on. So, but in all those things, there's no mystery about it. Yeah. It's like they're like, because you're missing records, it's often stated there's some kind of nefarious thing going on where things are being hidden. And that's not the case. It's just that you can't get access to these death certificates unless the family requests them.
There was also 14. Is another number I remember from reading the.
That's the that's Pine Creek.
Oh.
Well, number 14 is important for Pine Creek, which is the case in Manitoba, where the elders or the knowledge keepers said that, children been buried in the basement of this church.
Yeah.
And so they got the GPR people to go in there, and they found 14 anomalies in the church basement. And they went down there and dug in there, and they found rocks in the church basement. So that was the number 14 that I'm familiar with. Now, Kamloops, I'm just trying to think of 14. I don't know, but that could be a number.
I thought there was 14, 14 who they just simply didn't know the whereabouts about.
No, there's nothing there. We're missing death certificates from this 51.
Okay.
I guess around 10 of them, or maybe a little bit more of the death certificates are missing. But that's not because anyone said that these children are missing or anything. It's because we just don't have the death certificates. And because we don't have access.
Oh, okay. I thought the 10 referred to like 10 of the 51. We don't know where they're buried, or no?
Well, we won't know where they're buried until we have the death certificates.
Right.
So that's how we find out where people are buried.
Oh, right. Okay. So we don't know where they're buried. So theoretically, they could be in the apple orchard then.
Yeah, but there's not one child where someone's saying,
yeah,
we don't know, they never came home, we don't know what happened to them. No one's saying that about Kamloops. You occasionally do hear this, like there was a child, you saw this in the Fifth Estate documentary. There's a student who was there in the morning, and then in the afternoon he was gone, and we don't know what, but no one has a name, or it's not like, I don't know, like, does that happen where the child then gets taken out of school because, the parents are dying or something, and then everyone goes, what happened to Johnny? And then no one knows. And this is all the kind of murkiness that's going on with all these discussions, instead of, Argentina. There's a picture of these women, mothers of the disappeared, who are holding up photographs of their children who just disappeared.
Yeah.
So we're saying, here's a mother who they're saying their child disappeared. What happened to that child? And then you find a clandestine burial, and you do all the DNA tests on those remains to see whether that child is connected to this mother who's saying that her child was kidnapped and then never returned. This is not the thing we're dealing with. The other thing that we're dealing with is the case of things like Tanya Talaga. So Tanya Talaga, her great grandmother was in an asylum and they didn't know where her great grandmother was buried. They found out it was in the cemetery that used to be a cemetery, but now it's been abandoned. So it's just a plot of land next to the Gardner Expressway. So what if you're Tanya Talaga, you could perhaps find plans for that cemetery and find out which plot the great
Yeah.
grandmother was buried in. Go to the Gardner Expressway and look at that land and try and figure out on that land where
Yeah.
that grave would be. Or maybe just go and find out where that plot is and go and do, offer some tobacco and all these kinds of things that are done, which is, if people want to do that, then that's I can understand that's their thing. But people are thinking this is about like the Argentinian situation, which there is no evidence of that at all. Like we haven't had one
Yeah.
one case where it's this specific, a child disappeared and the parents didn't know where the child went and it got murdered, maybe whatever, and it was buried clandestinely, this kind of thing. So there's a whole bunch, those kinds of two things are getting mixed up.
Yeah. Yeah. I
But
mean,
in terms of Williams Lake, there was ground penetrating radar that was done to detect anomalies. I believe that is the case of a cemetery.
yeah.
So, you have a cemetery where the crosses have blown away. The boundary of the cemetery is not very well known. Cowessus is the best example I know of this case, where it was a cemetery and then all the markers flew away and then they just turned it into a kind of a soccer field type of thing. And so
Yeah.
there's 751, they think, or there's a number of graves there, but no one knows who's buried where in that big field. And you could, if you knew your loved one had been buried in that cemetery, you could try to find some kind of records that would show that, like,
Yeah.
and then find out where they were specifically buried. But then the question is, well, why not just do a ceremony for the whole field? Why do you need to know the specific plot where it is? But if you want, I guess if you wanted to do that, and then you could put a gravestone on there and
Well, they
go
should
with
do
it,
that. Yeah. They
that
should
sort
have,
of thing.
yeah, I mean, they should have some sort of memorial there, although they probably should actually locate some bodies. I mean,
Well, they know that it's a cemetery,
yeah.
so it's not.
Yeah.
They know
I guess,
there's bodies there. It's
yeah, they
just,
know. Yeah. Okay.
but
Yeah.
specifically figuring out which body is buried where.
Yeah.
There's some records, I assume, maybe, of when they were burying people at the time in that cemetery, where the various grave sites were, maybe, but maybe not. Like maybe those records are missing. This is not, but anyway, I'm
Well,
finding this is very, it's being done in what appears, in my view, to be bad faith, where people are deliberately confusing these two things so that when they're talking about bodies in cemeteries, they make it seem as if they're bodies in very clandestinely. Blue
yeah.
quills, which is in Alberta, there were some mass graves with respect to blue quills because of epidemics.
Yeah.
So they buried a number of bodies together, but those are not clandestine burials. They're bodies that were buried because of um,
Was it typhus and
yeah, there's just too many bodies to have individual plots. So that's not the same thing either. Uh,
typhus and TB, maybe? Or no, no, the Spanish flu would be an example of,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I think typhus might have been one of them as well. But Michelle Sterling was talking about this, and the weird thing about, I believe it's blue quills, is the someone who's the tender of the area, like he's a maintenance person or something. He has a backhoe, and he was digging in the cemetery to bury new, I guess, have new corpses are going to be buried there. He kept on digging up skeletons. So, and so we were all saying,
Yeah.
why don't they stop that guy? Stop
Yeah.
that guy from getting his backhoe and digging up the skeletons.
Yeah.
Like, get another cemetery somewhere else so that you're
Yeah.
not disturbing the remains there.
Yeah.
But that was another thing because he was pretending that they were pretending that this was like a clandestine burial that they were digging up. But anyway,
Yeah.
but Williams Lake has been in the news because of they had a ground penetrating radar thing. They had a big press release, kind of press conference type of thing, and it was a lot of raw emotion again in this issue of cemeteries that have been abandoned type of
Yeah, I
issue.
mean, it really is a question of now I when I was an Indigenous politics tutor, I read the volume of the TRC report
Mhm.
that came out in 2009, I believe. That is, I think there were some earlier reports before the final report, right?
There were some like reports done. They weren't the official
Yeah,
volume whatever, but
but there was
but
like
Scott Hamilton did at least one report, which didn't be. I think it formed the basis of the one of I think it's called something to do with missing children, which again you shouldn't be really saying missing children. There are no missing children. There are children buried in cemeteries which people don't exactly know which grave site they're in, and maybe it's not known. The parents didn't really have kind of forgotten which cemetery they're in if they had to be buried because they weren't able to be returned to the
well, the
one
real
cemetery.
scandal is that when they wound down the schools, there was no provision made to memorialize these old grave sites, right?
Yeah,
I remember reading in that volume of the report, they described it quite well, and this is the TRC Commission talking, describing how um, they would use like cheap wooden crosses, and very often these would wear away after time.
yeah,
And sometimes there would be a mix of sort of Christian or native ceremony, depending on the location or the circumstances or whatever.
yeah.
Um, but um, I guess so. The issue really was um, forgotten or not maintained graves,
Mm,
and not really clandestine graves,
yes,
which is just a completely different, well, quite different.
it is. It's like night and day because one is criminal kinds of things, and the other is just you could argue, more thought should have, as you say, you have these cemeteries, indigenous people supposedly, and this is unclear because if you look at the Kamloops reserve,
Yeah.
there's a church. They have a church, and across from the church is a cemetery. It's the band cemetery. It's completely unkempt and not all sorts of unmarked graves. No one cares. No one's doing anything there. So if we're going to be saying that this is such an important issue for
Yeah.
the band, why are they not tending the cemetery that
Yeah.
they have control of?
Yeah.
And I've heard that the when and in some cases I don't remember which one, the church turned over the oversight of the whole thing to indigenous group, and the indigenous group didn't. No one did
Well,
it.
no, isn't it partly that traditional pre-contact burial practices? I mean, yes, we have burial mounds in various places, often, with natural markers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically what they did, right? As
Well, some
opposed,
put them up on the trees and like in scaffolding and stuff like that.
well, it must vary quite a bit.
So that varies, but there was no, as far as I understand it, there was no having an individual marked, and then you go and visit the grave, and so like that. That's a European concept. So what's going on is indigenous people, some adopted that practice from the Christians, and they're doing it. And Mark de Wolf, who was a son of one of the heads of a residential school. He sent pictures around at one point. The more wealthy Indigenous families would
Yeah.
have the kind of the headstone
Yeah. Wow.
type of thing. So it's kind of, to some extent, you need to have the money to be able to purchase the the kind of marker that's going to withstand time.
Hmm.
Uh, and that obviously in many Indigenous people were impoverished, so they wouldn't be doing that. So even if they'd wanted to, that wasn't really an option. And the same with what would be called paupers' graves generally. But I like most people, like I don't know where beyond my parents. I don't know where my grandparents are buried. I don't know where my great grand. I have no idea about these matters. And I would imagine most people, that's their circumstances too. So
Yeah.
we're sort of having expectations about keeping track of these things, which is far beyond the norm. And yeah, and I think this is being to some extent used as a political tool, you know,
Yeah.
just to kind of shame the authorities for not doing what is claimed to supposed to have been done. These sorts of things.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't find
I'm
it's very helpful to
yeah.
trying to come to terms with all these problems.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Williams Lake had this. Williams Lake is an interesting case because of the Sugarcane documentary, the the residential school there, the unmarked graves issue, and it's kind of tied into the whole British Columbia uh, politics.
Mhm.
Indigenous politics in British Columbia. I don't know what your opinion is on this. Is the one that's particularly fraught.
Because of the lack of treaties, you mean,
Yeah.
outside of Vancouver Island, and yeah.
Is that what's your thoughts on the nature of British Columbia uh, Indigenous politics comparatively in comparison with other uh, Indigenous politics?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, the Chilcotin have a kind of reputation for being quite feisty.
Yeah.
Um, I
there's
mean,
some there's some interesting historical documents. I'm not sure if you've seen them. I think it's the Chilcotin Wars.
yeah, oh, right, yeah,
Anyway, and the groups to get like this Indigenous on Indigenous
yeah,
war,
yeah.
and taking children and basically slicing them down the middle to act as a warning
Wow,
to
yeah.
other tribes. And
Was
that
that,
that's a document that was sent to me a year ago, and
yeah,
I found it to be particularly horrifying, the kinds of intertribal warfare that were going on. Now, of course, that's post contact,
yeah,
so you had an acceleration of animosity and weaponry
yeah.
because of
Oh, right.
contact.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I could see how that would happen. There would be a growing scarcity of land and
And types of
weapons.
weapons,
Yeah.
and increasing competition, this sort of thing. So that's got to be kept in
Yeah,
mind. Like
was it the
people always
Chilcotin
kind of,
and the Shuswap or something? And
I'm not an expert
I
in this
think they
area, so
signed us.
I just got sent this document on the Chilcotin Wars, and uh,
Yeah,
I found it was pretty horrifying, the kinds of things that were going on. Um, yeah, but the lack of treaties, and then the whole Aboriginal title kind of issue that came about in the Delgamuukw case. And now we've got DRIPA, which is the provincial legislation that is drawn from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which has got serious implications for property rights in British Columbia.
oh no.
Do you know anything about that?
No, I mean, so we probably signed something.
Well, they've so after the Kamloops
Yeah,
discovery, there's pressure put on the federal government to push through United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And
yeah,
there's kind of stalling tactics that were, because it is a very dangerous document, because it creates it undermines the basis of sovereignty in
Yeah.
Canada. Uh, and if you're woke, you say, well, that's good because then we can
Well, this is
we
my
can we can burn it all down. We can use this to burn it all down.
yeah. Well, this is where my sort of academic freedom concern comes in. Is that I mean, I get this feeling that there was an intellectual failure around the Kamloops
There was.
that that people who should be aware, or maybe even were aware,
Mm,
that this wasn't really a mass grave site. Um, and furthermore, unmarked grave doesn't mean it isn't previously marked.
yeah.
That everybody was just happy to play on these misconceptions in order to get the graves, in order to get all the statues torn down and to get Leah Gazan's motion passed and to advance the political agenda. I mean, I sort of suspect a lot of my own colleagues are kind of complicit in that. That
Yes,
I
they are.
mean, I mean, and I just feel like saying no, no. I mean, we're in the truth business,
Yeah.
and if we tell the truth in a suitably, qualified, detached way, and people still want to tear down 9 statues and burn 61 churches down to the ground, well, then, that's their decision. But I mean, to deliberately suppress or not question what we ought to be questioning,
Mm,
we're actually, almost literally fueling those flames. Uh,
yeah.
and it, um, and I mean, I'm perfectly willing to accept the description of reality that was in volume 4 of that report, which I think was 2009. Was it volume 3 or volume 4? Where they describe how they didn't send bodies back to the families because they were too cheap. They didn't have the money,
Mm,
and how the cheap crosses would wear down. And
yeah.
um, I'm more concerned about how the goalposts have been moved since then.
Mhm.
I mean, I mean, what I want to do, maybe you've already do, is I'd like to examine the speeches in Parliament that people made when everybody voted for Leah Gazan's motion. I mean, were they all talking about clandestine graves? Were they talking about mass graves? I mean,
No, well,
or
and this would be a good thing to trace. Gazan was her talk on January 20th.
yeah.
That's on my SoundCloud.
Oh, right. I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but
She mentioned there in her talk that she tried to intimidate a number of MPs from saying anything in opposition to her. It's not very clear what she did there.
yeah,
So I got to do. So she tried once right after Kamloops at some point in 2021 to get this motion passed.
yeah,
And it's kind of interesting as to, I don't know why it didn't go forward in 2021. You would expect that because
yeah,
that's when the emotions were
yeah.
the highest.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Right. Yeah,
So it failed in 2021. And then she brought it back in 2022 after it had been recognized by the band by Sarah Beaulieu's
oh,
presentation that
that's weird, isn't it?
yeah, so that's a kind of a bit of a mystery, but I think it was just a little bit of momentum that kind of got going. And then she did
Well,
this tactic. She said
did Lynn
she did
Lynn
some kind of
Bayak
tactic
happen? Did Lynn Bayak happen in the meantime, or is that what happened? Or
that had happened before that.
well,
So
okay, I'm just
2020 was Bayak. So Bayak, that happened to her. 21 was the Kamloops announcement, and then 2022 was the Gazan's genocide motion. But she did something. She claims in her speech that she did some posting of information on social media against some MPs that then led them to be silent. And I don't know what that was. So that would be an interesting thing too. But no one questioned her in 2022 because they were too intimidated to do it. And this is the kind of problem that people got to really pay attention to is, and this is the kind of climate we're dealing with, is people sense that it's going to be dangerous for them to put up their hand and say, what about this? And we now have a slight movement. I'm not sure what if you think getting into the trans rights issue is how are you about, how are you talking, how do you feel about talking about this one?
Oh, oh, that's interesting because I was wondering if it was a problem uh, confined to Indigenous things, but obviously, no. I mean, trans rights are a hot issue. In some ways, I mean, trans people are in the same position that gay people were in like 20 or 30 years ago, I guess. But in other ways, they're different.
Yeah, very different. Some would say
Because
in opposition, but this is an example of, we had a lot of a similar kind of feeling of don't go there.
yeah,
And now it's kind of been, to some extent, this has been overcome maybe because of Donald Trump saying that there's only two genders.
yeah.
So Donald Trump said that. And then Pierre Poilievre, in an interview a few days ago, sort of pushed back against someone arguing that there was more than two genders. And there wasn't as much of a firestorm about it as there would have been a year or so ago. So that's kind of a bit of a breaking down that taboo, the fear that if you put your hand up and ask the question,
Oh,
you're going to
right.
be taken out. uh, so this is again the kind of same issue that's going on in.
Well, I used to think that sex was one thing and gender was another, and that
Yeah.
sort of solved the problem. Like sex was binary, and
Mhm.
gender was kind of more of a fluid kind of
Do you have a good understanding of what gender is? Like, do you know what that means, gender?
um well, it refers more to identity and social ascription of identity,
Yeah.
where sex refers to the biological
Yeah.
givens.
Yes.
Now, the
But do you think that
complication,
there's more than two genders? See,
um,
like this is kind of annoying because
no,
people
not
should be saying
really.
there's two sexes. Like what both Trump and Polyev seem to be using gender when they meant sex.
Yeah. Oh,
Uh,
I actually believe that there's two genders, but you can sort of be between them or, be a mix of them or, whereas well, okay, we could
it can
talk
be
about
both genders.
with rare biological exceptions of hermaphroditism and intersexuality. I mean, we can still say sex is an essentially binary thing.
Well, evidently, from what I understand, intersex is it's just an anomaly on either the male or the female sex.
Yeah.
So you have females who have a distortion of some kind, they're
Yeah.
intersex. Males who have a distortion of some kind, they're intersex. It's not like a spectrum of, which has kind of been a bit of the.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I did read somewhere that the Moroccan boxer
Yeah,
um is that she really
Algeria.
actually had some kind of um
Yeah, it's a
some
sexual
kind of
development disorder. So
some kind of proto-testicular.
yeah, it's a man. So this is a
Yeah,
man, a man with some kind of sexual development disorder, which so when he was born, because of his genitalia not developing in the right way, people thought he was a girl. And if you're before you go through puberty, it's easy to kind of get mistaken about these things, but he did go through puberty, and so it would have been noticed that he started to develop a lot of male kind of characteristics. But because of a massive failure of the sporting world, no one just kind of said, hey, this is not, let's get this person to a swab to determine if they're a man. No one did that, and so they allowed this man to go in and beat the crap out of a bunch of women.
Yeah, I know. It was kind of scary seeing that woman just give up, sort of
Yeah,
throw her
like,
hands
I'm
up.
going to get brain damage now because I'm going to be fighting a man. It's like,
Yeah,
well, not that, like, I'm again. I think boxing should be banned anyway because,
yeah.
like, this
Oh,
is
yeah.
not this.
Oh, that's a good
You don't
point.
want
Yeah,
to have people, hitting each other in the head, like, because this is
yeah.
not. But having a man beat up a woman is like it's even more horrendous. So yeah, so this whole thing is because of the failures of not part of the story is the failure of academic freedom to be able to allow people to make these arguments without being subjected to various mobbing campaigns that are going on in the university.
Well, I have like a transgendered cousin, and apparently I have had an uncle who was transgendered who I never met. He kind of went into self-exile.
Yeah.
But the I guess what complicates it a little bit is that there may be a genetic or chromosomal basis for their identity.
Uh,
Because obviously these people wouldn't put themselves through this hell unless they something very innate told them that I'm in the wrong body.
well, it often it's well. First of all, I think there's a lot of psychiatric circumstances here.
Yeah,
You have the chromosomes are a difficult thing because you have you have a lot of variations of the chromosomes. The important thing of biological sex is the gametes. Large, immobile gametes for female, small, mobile gametes for male.
yeah,
Sperm, egg. That's the binary.
yeah.
And then we got a whole bunch of other things like the chromosomal kinds of things, the hormonal types of things, all these things. But that's all neither.
Oh,
It
so there's a
will.
separate chromosome for sexual orientation or sexual identity or you know
Well, if you have a generally if you have a Y chromosome, that's male. And
yeah,
anytime, but it's not always because there's a straight. Some I got corrected. I got corrected
or
on
a
one of my
gene.
posts.
You could be a male who gets stuck with a female gene or a vice or no.
I don't think that my understanding. There's a lot of this is psychological. You have testosterone, so you might have a woman, for example, who has relatively high testosterone
Yeah, well, there
level.
was a South African woman who had a
Man,
high
man,
natural.
man. It
You
was a
mean
man.
you mean Castor? What's her
Yes,
name?
man. It's a man. It's a man with where the genitalia did not manifest. Did
Oh, I
not.
thought she just had high testosterone levels. No,
No,
are you
no.
sure we're talking about the same person?
Yes,
Like this is
Castor
not the Moroccan, but the South African.
Yes.
Wow, eh?
Yeah.
That Castor Semenya or whatever.
Yeah.
She's a
It's a
man.
man. Yes.
Wow, eh?
So, like, and that's what it's not about whether
Well,
you got your genitals that are external or not. It's about, are you a sperm producer or are you an egg producer? And generally, you're either one or the other. And sometimes you have a very odd cases. Someone who actually has a Y chromosome. I can't remember the name of this, but it's a syndrome. You've got a Y chromosome, but it for some reason you have female reproductive structure develops. You don't have gonads there; they don't develop, but you've got the female. You've got a uterus, and you've got this sort of thing that's been developed. So you would then be classified as female, and they don't have any testosterone.
well, didn't the Moroccan person think that she was female? Or
Yes, well, probably because they were raised as a girl
yeah,
because no one saw any genitals. So it's like
yeah.
there's no penis here, so it's a girl like that. But the penis just hadn't developed or whatever. But when that person started to go through puberty and started to get more of the male build and started to get all the male characteristics, people were going, oh. But the sporting authorities should have just taken a DNA test to find out, like, just do a swab on the cheek and find out what the actual sexual characteristic, genetic sexual characteristic. But they wouldn't do it because they're going to get totally, swarmed by all the trans activists.
Yeah.
So this has been totally confused by the whole academic.
So well, I mean, I guess,
And I know this for myself because, okay, we're at the hour mark, and it's a good transition because my firing
yeah,
this is one of the issues that
yeah.
resulted in my firing. Is the mobbing and the toxicity. And I wasn't even at the time. I've become much more emboldened now because I've just said, look, you guys, you are full of shit, and I'm not gonna allow you to intimidate me anymore with all your bullshit. Anyway, but at the time, I wasn't studying it. I didn't know. I hadn't listened. I just thought my view of the time was in 2019. That's when it started, or no, 2018. So 2018 started because I invited Megan Murphy to come to Mount Royal in March 2019 to discuss the question with Julie Ray Goldstein: does trans activism negatively impact women's rights? That was the question. And so from that moment on, I had a target that was on me, and it got worse and worse and worse and worse until I was fired in 2021. And so that's a big part of the story. And at the time, I didn't have any. I was kind of alarmed at the kind of totalitarian pressures that you weren't able to discuss it.
Yeah.
But I didn't know, like, I thought that Caster Semenya was a woman with high testosterone.
Well, that's what I just thought. I mean, that's what I've always read.
I thought that too.
Yeah.
But I found out Megan Murphy is, no, this is a man with an intersex condition.
Oh, no. She's the expert, right?
She's
the biologist?
She's not a biologist. It's Fond of Beetles is her Twitter handle. She's a sexual development disorder biologist who studies that in biology. She's in the United Kingdom, and she was the one talking about the boxer, which is, because but with Caster Semenya, no one really at that in 2019 was really speaking as boldly as I just spoke 5 minutes ago. Like, we shouldn't be afraid to say, no, that's a man.
Yeah,
it's
no,
I agree. With an intersex condition, it's a man who believes he's a woman. And, like, you can believe you're a woman if you want to. Like, go ahead, go put on a dress. And if you're old enough or whatever, and you think it's really going to help you, go get some, get your penis cut off and your, all these things, right, that you want to do if it's going to help you. But we should be looking at whether it's going to help you, first of all, because maybe it won't. And then now you're back to where you started without your penis, which is even worse than it was before.
No, I mean, I wonder about my cousin. I mean, I always kind of thought that he or she was fortunate because she was, he was rather small and he had rather smooth features, and that he could
pass.
That if he really wanted to go that way, he could.
And something that then often it's wound up with homosexuality because, and actually it's Mia Hughes is the other great person. There's Mia Hughes, Helen Joyce. Forgive me for not remembering this woman's name, but her Twitter handle is Fond of Beetles. I don't remember her name, but those three are absolutely excellent. And Megan Murphy is more the political side, who was kind of, doing the hard yards before anyone was, taking all the damage. But Mia Hughes was talking about homosexual men who are very effeminate.
Yeah.
They have a hard time even in the gay community because male homosexuals like men, like they're attracted to
Yeah.
men. So now
Yeah.
you've got an effeminate man and you're not very sexually attractive
Or
to,
you're assumed to be a submissive kind of
yeah, like
yes for kind of
you're not having a good, your situation is not good. So what you do that, and as well, society probably to some extent still makes fun of you if you're a very effeminate man.
yeah.
So it's better just to become a woman, and then now you're sort of quote unquote normal. Like, and but that's a societal problem. Like we have to work on society to say that's not right for society to make someone feel absolutely like they don't belong in their they're a second class citizen and whatever because of the things that they just were born with and this is the way they are. You know, we should be in all of our, you know, discussions of diversity. Why can't we be welcoming of very effeminate men and very masculine women? Why are people insisting of this like cookie cutter kind of
Well,
sheep?
well, I mean, we are more accepting than we have been in the past, right?
Yes, but
Yeah.
we've kind of now, because of what's happened, is that our compassion is being used against us by woke people, by woke psychopaths who want to get power, and then that's how they get power is by pretending that this is all about compassion when it's about asserting power and getting resources from other people. And this is kind of got to be grappled with now, and it's not very comfortable to do it because you have to have a personality a personality that can stand up to it and risk, you know,
Yeah.
being thrown off the island and becoming a pariah. You know, and it's a very very difficult kind of skill to try to like
Well,
to not
it's
get, you know, kind of
that
completely.
this kind of surprised me. I always assumed that you were under attack primarily because of your indigenous
That was, there was
experience.
two issues that got, well, there's three issues. um, the trans activism, the indigenization, and the book title. And I'm going to say a book title now is going to be, people are not going to like, but as I've said, I am not going to back down from this. A book title by Pierre Vallieres, who
Uh,
was a Quebec sovereigntist, who wanted to make the point that the reason why people are denigrated is because of economic class, not because of race. And so that led him to have the book title White Niggers of America to refer to the Quebecois. So I defended Wendy Mesley, who used that book title. And because of me defending Wendy Mesley, I got mobbed by Gabrielle Weasel Head and her merry band of totalitarians. And we still have not had a reckoning about this at Mount Royal, which we are going to have a reckoning about this because people think that I went after Gabrielle Weaselhead and, you know, caused her all this psychological harm. And, you know, I went and I was, you
well,
know, this,
because of the white nigger thing,
yeah,
or
yeah. She decided this was her chance to go after me. And
yeah,
I would
but
not
she's an
give
indigenous activist who sort of seized on that. Oh, right. Okay.
yes, and I would not give her 1,000th of an inch on it. And
Yeah.
because of that, it just enraged, it caused this huge temper tantrum amongst, you know, about, well, certainly 20 faculty members, but 40, it was kind of a larger circle of about 40. And they're continuing to go after me. Like they will not stop. And because my union is so captured,
Yeah.
so unbelievably captured, it cannot defend me. It's not able to defend me. in any robust way.
Oh, thought I detected um, a little bit of modification of your view about your union and how well it represented you. I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of the actual arbitration hearing. I mean, didn't you sort of make a concession and say, well, you know, they did sort of do what they were supposed to do or something like that? No?
Well, they have to defend me because of the duty of fair representation. So
Yeah.
they're taking it forward, but they're not fighting it uh, in a principled way, and they're not fighting it on the grounds that it needs to be fought, because they're defending on the other side Gabrielle Weasel Head, D.A. Dirks, and Renee Watchman. So there's a trans activist and two Indigenous activists who they are defending, and they're taking their cases forward to arbitration as well. And that in those cases, it's argued that I made their workplaces unsafe and that MRU did not do enough to protect them from me making their workplaces unsafe. So that's the problem, is that the unions, when you have conflicts between members,
Yeah.
unions have to defend both sides of the conflict with fairness and equal representation. And the union cannot do that in my case because they've been captured by equity, diversity, and inclusion activism. And so I'm going to pursue the union on this basis.
I mean, but
Next,
how in on the labor board, you mean?
yes.
Oh, okay. So the labor board, okay, this is interesting. Okay. So the labor board, that is an appeal, or is it just a separate
It's a
action?
complaint, duty of fair representation complaint.
Yeah, duty of fair representation, but
Yeah.
it's not really an appeal of the arbitrator's decision.
No, that's going forward on my side. So this case, we really need a Daniel Smith. If you're listening to this podcast, we need a public inquiry into this because it's so broken. The system is so broken.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. I'm kind of slow. No,
Yeah.
is this two separate actions then?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
Two separate actions.
by you.
And the union is can abandon me at any time, and they might, because
You're no
like,
longer, yeah.
well, I'm talking about the union keeps on telling me that I can't, or they don't want me to talk about this public, right? But at the same time, they're allowing all sorts of things to happen, of people to speak to the membership, making spreading misinformation about my case, and the president of the union is spreading misinformation about my case. So they're allowing that kind of undermining of the case to happen, while at the same time going through the motions of taking my case forward. And I have no, because I've been kicked out of the union, I've been disenfranchised, and I have no way of speaking to the membership. So I have to hear that I just had a whole bunch of people making claims about me in the last meeting, which I wasn't able to respond to.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a terrible, terrible situation because of the failure. The failure, it's a catastrophic failure on a number of fronts that has to be grappled with. And the failure is due to equity, diversity, and inclusion ideology. Like that.
Well,
That's the problem.
ideology or actual policies and provisions in.
Well, that's what's caused the policies and provisions. So,
Hmm.
but it's more the way in which people see, and academic freedom, of course, is the casualty of it.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking is that academic I mean, you're supposed to be balancing academic freedom with, harassment and discrimination, and also various policies of various kinds that are being made all the time. And
Yeah.
um, it always seems like academic freedom kind of loses that, or that academic freedom is what people take up when it's not conflicting with those things.
Well, academic freedom uh, is the highest value, should be seen as the highest value,
Yeah.
and you can't have, if you're exercising your academic freedom, which is ideas. So academic freedom is the pursuit of ideas. Pursuing academic freedom can't be harassing because it's about ideas. But what's happened is that equity, diversity, and inclusion has redefined harassment to be and this is because you asked me something about this in the last event. The report, which is discusses this, is Jeffrey Hope's. The reason why I was fired is because of Jeffrey Hope's report. So Jeffrey Hope was the investigator hired by MRU to investigate the complaint of the Indigenous activist Renee Watchman. And in this complaint, I had a number of social media posts which satirized the comparison of the residential schools to the Holocaust and Indigenous knowledge not being evidence-based and so on. Anyway, Hope found that because I had denigrated the viewpoints of Indigenous activists, that was harassment. That was his finding. And
Now,
that should be appealed.
what did the CAUT say in response to that?
They're avoiding it because they believe in the other side,
Yeah.
in the grievances that are going forward to arbitration on behalf of Watchman, Dirks, and Lindstrom, they accept that argument on that side, and they're going to make it that it is harassment. They're going to argue that it is harassment to denigrate the viewpoints of Indigenous and trans activists. That's what their argument is on the other side, but which to some extent they're obligated to do, I guess. But they should be they should be pursuing my anti-harassment, my arguments against that being harassment on the other side. But because they're captured, they can't do it.
The CAUT is captured.
Well,
Because,
they're representing my union, which is captured. So,
yeah, but they were supporting your case, right?
yeah, but they're not supporting it on the academic freedom. Well, they're supporting it on the procedural side. So they were making arguments that I wasn't, the procedures weren't followed, these sorts of things. They did make arguments that my academic freedom wasn't protected, but in the appeal, they're not pursuing. Well, we'll see what they're going to do. It's still a sliver. They're not appealing the harassment findings. They're appealing the lack of reinstatement. So the position is that I did engage in harassment. It's just that I was disciplined too much. And because I followed instructions and did stuff and a bunch of other reasons, I should be able to be reinstated. But they're not saying Widdowson never harassed anyone, which is what I never harassed anyone. This is all made up.
Well, you would admit that maybe someone could harass somebody in the guise of just having an intellectual argument.
Well, you'd have to be engaged in the kind of definitional, what we used to think of harassment, which would be the haranguing of someone as an individual and making personal, nothing to do with the idea. So if you said this idea is stupid, that
Yeah.
wouldn't be harassment.
Oh, right. But
Because if you said
you
you're an
called,
idiot,
you
you
called
are
somebody.
you blah 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 idiot, and then maybe some racial
Yeah.
slurs or whatever added into it, like the kind of the belittling of the person as opposed to the belittling of the idea. But what they're doing with the Hope Report is the belittling of the idea is harassment. They've gone across. They've gone they've gone over that line, and that should be just fought by the unions at every step of the way, and they won't do it because they do believe that themselves, that belittling the idea of an Indigenous person or a trans activist is harassment. They believe that, and I'm not going to take that. I will not accept that, and I'm going to fight them on that. And people should know what that's going to mean, because you were mentioning all the stuff, the failure about the unmarked graves,
Yeah.
the massive failure about trans activism, and all the terrible harm that's been done, the actual physical harm that's been done to children, which is we're never gonna, their lives have been destroyed because of this failure of the academic institutions to be able to have these intellectual arguments about biological sex and the psychological problems that are wound up with trans activism. Like, this is a big psychological problem.
So, you called some people race hustlers.
Yeah.
Now, is that an overly?
I called two anonymous Twitter accounts race hustler. Well, I said race hustling. This is a process of race hustling that's being done because they were using accusations of racism to try to extract resources from the university. Now, Gabrielle Weasel Head, because I had the hashtag race hustling in this tweet, uh,
Yeah.
argued that I was calling her a race hustler, but I did not call Gabrielle Weaselhead a race hustler. In fact, I don't know whether Gabrielle Weaselhead is a race hustler or not. I know that this anonymous Twitter account is engaged in race hustling because it is making accusations of racism to extract resources for its associates.
Well,
So
and you would
if
certainly
someone's
have
doing
no
that,
trouble saying that you have a serious intellectual position on rent seeking, and I mean, if that in a theoretic, in a hypothetical courtroom situation, you'd have no trouble demonstrating, your sincerity and the body of theory and evidence behind it, and that.
yeah. Well, Thomas Sowell. It's from Thomas Sowell. He's the one who coined the term, I believe.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's if I called a colleague a race hustler, that would be coming close to uh, what would be deemed to be harassment.
Yeah.
But I never called anyone a race hustler. I said there's a process of race hustling going on,
Hmm.
and we can you can maybe draw an inference that some people who are engaged, if you are engaged in this process of race hustling, then you are a race hustler. But we don't know who exactly, as an individual, is engaged in this process of race hustling, because those two accounts are anonymous, and we don't know who made the tweets and the whole this letter. What it was this open letter that was demanding that there be mandatory anti-racism training, and that all sorts of resources be diverted to various anti-racism programs and all these kinds of things. But yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that
But it's an interesting question about, in the academic realm, what what kinds of comments are harassment?
Um, well, I mean, you can't take the language in the collective agreement totally literally because, they say something about if you can foresee that someone will be offended. Well, obviously you can foresee that Rebecca Weaselhead will be offended by anything you say.
Yeah,
But
Gabrielle.
I
Gabrielle,
mean,
we said.
oh, Gabrielle, yeah. I mean, I had kind of stumbled into something once. I said to on a small group of a voluntary group of political scientists, social scientists, whatever, I said, um, yeah, look at this article by David Frum in the Atlantic Monthly saying good things about Sir John A. Macdonald. This is obviously in the news because people are burning churches and
Yeah,
tearing statues down. But no, this was seen as really offensive,
yeah,
really offensive. And of course, I could argue that, of course, I didn't know that these people were even on the mailing list. But in the future, of course, I can see that, anything like that, obviously it's foreseeable that they would be offended. So I
yeah,
mean, I mean, you have to balance, no, you have to balance that against academic freedom and say that academic freedom is reasonable.
yeah.
Now,
Well, I think that language,
yeah,
that language should be out.
yeah,
So you have to get rid of language like that. So you can see a circumstance where someone, especially if they're in a position of power, so let's say a chair is brought someone into their office, his or her office, and is belittling that person, is telling them that the way they're thinking about this, only a moron would think about this issue in the way that you are. Blah, 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 blah. This kind of thing, right? So that seems to me to be the kind of thing we're talking about. But in my case, just to bring, I'll just bring the actual examples of what was found. So the trans activist, D.A. Dirks, was had given a workshop to the faculty association on how white supremacy culture was infusing the faculty. Like this was a potential problem for the faculty association, that the white supremacy culture was impacting it. And I was trying to get a report from the faculty association. And white supremacy culture is things like objectivity and writing things down in memos and being on time for meetings and things like this. This is not
well,
valid.
any reference to the Enlightenment, I imagine, would be.
Yeah. So like this is just idiotic. This kind of thing, right? So and she was, sorry, not she, Da Dirks, because Da Dirks is non-binary and wants to be called they them by they them pronouns.
Yeah.
And of course, Da Dirks always gets misgendered all the time because people. I just did it then. I
Hmm.
referred to Da Dirks as she because Da Dirks is an egg producing human who looks like a woman. She's not
Hmm.
even a masculine. They are, or D.A. Dirks is not even a masculine woman. D.A. Dirks, one sees D.A. Dirks and one thinks she. So this is constant, misgendering that's going on.
Well, if D.A. Dirks ever asked me to refer to her with using the male pronoun,
Yeah.
I mean, I would feel a certain obligation to do that in an academic setting.
Well, I won't do it. What I'll do is I won't. I will just refer to Dirks as Dirks. I will not refer to Dirks by any pronouns at all. So like I'm solving the problem in that I'm
Okay, well,
not.
that's fine.
Yeah, but I'm opposed to calling someone by a pronoun of which I don't believe that they are the thing that they call themselves. I'm not going to do that.
yeah, that's okay. You shouldn't be forced to. I'm not sure exactly what the Jordan Peterson issue was,
It
but I
was that was
mean,
it. It was compelled speech.
Yeah, he didn't want to be compelled to use the pronoun. And
No, so I'm going to avoid the issue entirely and just call Dirks Dirks and don't refer to whatever. But I'm not going to call Dirks they. It's like no, I'm not using they them pronouns. I'm not going to do it. Anyway, so I'm trying to get the union to tell me how much Dirks was paid for this workshop that was paid out of my dues. Anyway, the union would not tell me. Said that this was confidential, what Dirks was paid, which I think is high. I find that hard to believe that I'm not allowed to know where my dues are going. So Dirks knew that I was doing this and filed a harassment complaint against me, and with all sorts of things that were obviously not harassment. Like, for example, proposing making a motion in Arts Faculty Council to support the labor of people who are engaged in critical thinking on feminist philosophies pertaining to sex and gender. And that passed, that motion. Dirk said that was harassment, moving this motion. Anyway, all of those things were found not to be harassment, except this one tweet where John Kay got a hold of this workshop that Dirks was giving on the white supremacy culture and was making fun of it on Twitter. And then Kay said, look, this person giving the white supremacy culture workshop is also a they them.
Yeah.
This means that MRFA members can get white supremacizing and gender breeding in one venue.
Yeah.
So that was Kay's comment. And then a guy, his name is Dr. Tony, I don't know who it was really upset at Jonathan Kay for referring to Dirks as they them. And I satirically said, I don't know why Dr. Tony's so upset at Jonathan Kay for referring to this faculty member as they them. This person had, posted this cartoon, this what I thought was a ridiculous cartoon about misgendering fatigue and how every time you're misgendered, it's like you're getting a brick put in your backpack. And at the end of the day, you have to lie down because you have so many bricks in your backpack. I said that this colleague has hinted at suffering from misgendering fatigue and that Jonathan Kay is just amplifying a silenced TGBQ2S LMNOP voice. So that was my tweet, which I was taking issue with the misgendering fatigue idea. I was taking issue with all the letters that keep on expanding all the time. That one tweet was found to violate 3 policies and 2 laws, the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the Human Rights Act, by the investigator. So I don't think, although in looking at that, and of course I was in the hurly-burly world at that time of everyone mobbing me for the White Niggers of America tweet and calling me all sorts of stuff. So I was being a bit, whatever. And if I had to do that all over again, I would not have referred to an MRU colleague. I would have just been more generic about it. It's like, you can't win. If you refer to someone as a they them to help people use the pronouns, now that you're castigated because you're labeling someone as a they them. It seems to me to be, it's just a fraught kind of thing, and everyone's being way too oversensitive and catastrophic about all of this stuff. Just kind of dumb. Anyway, that's just an example of what counts for harassment these days. Which I don't think that tweet, although it was a bit not kind, it wasn't kind. It wasn't harassment.
Yeah.
In order for it to be harassment, I would have to be kind of having some kind of serious impact on someone's work, ability to work and everything. And this is one tweet. Then, like, you know, and the worst thing is that in all the other investigations, you had to mention someone specifically by name. It had to be more than one post, all these things. Everyone else got off by all their actions against me, but I do this one tweet and now I got to be suspended without pay for 2 weeks because of, you know, my terrible, harmful actions. So, you know, this is the kind of thing that's going on in terms of the equity, diversity, and inclusion kind of double standards that are happening, because it's argued that if you're a member of a protected ground, a group of a protected ground, no one should say anything to you that is going to cause you some kind of offense. And that kind of language about offense, like that shouldn't, there should be no reference to offense in any of this stuff. It should be a very, very specific, you're involved in repeated belittling, intimidation, all these kinds of words that make it so that someone cannot function in the workplace. That's what we're talking about. Not you've got a bruise, you know, you've sort of bruised someone's sensibilities a little bit or something like that.
They're bruised their ego or something.
Yeah, like no. This is and if they are gonna be following this path, you know, no one's gonna be able to say anything, because it's your tone, you're gonna be just unbelievably tone policed constantly. And you know, when you have academic debates, you tend to get a little bit fiery, you tend to get a bit passionate about things, and this is going to stifle, you know, we should have leniency in the other direction, not like the more restraining kind of thing. Anyway, so that's one example. And there's a bunch of, my case is like, it's very, very specific what I've been accused of. And if people would just look at those things, and, you know, and then the Weasel Head case, which is, I never went after Gabrielle Weaselhead at all. Like in the case of Dirks, okay, Dirks wasn't going after me on social media. So, you know, you could make the argument, why are you kind of doing this satirical thing on this white supremacy culture workshop and the pronouns and all this stuff, right? Like maybe that was certainly unwise to be doing that. And, you know, if I had to do it all over again, I would just steer clear of any mentioning of MRU colleague or MRFA.
Oh, well, that's what I wanted to ask you, is like what you would do differently, what you actually think you did wrong. I mean, not just A, was imprudent, and B, what you think you maybe actually deserve to be disciplined for. And
I didn't deserve to be disciplined for anything.
yeah.
So the discipline was total. And as well, MRU never counseled me on anything. So what they should have done, if they thought this was a problem, is they should have called me into their office, whomever, the authority figure, and said, you know, Frances, I just wanted to, you know, talk to you about this social media stuff. Whatever. And then give me some counsel about whatever. But that they didn't do that at all. They just sent out the investigation. They hired 2 lawyers to go after me, and it was a stitch up. You know, well, what they expected to happen was they were going to give me a really serious disciplinary iron fist. And then what I did is, when I got the findings that because it was my impression that social media was not covered under harassment or any of the policies. It turned out that my assumption was correct, because a colleague by the name of Milena Razankowska tried to file a harassment complaint against me in 2019 for social media activities. She was told by MRU that the MRU policies didn't cover social media. That's what
Oh,
they told her in 2019. In 2020, because of Gabrielle Weasel Head and the fact that she was a prized indigenization asset and they didn't want her uh, to be upset, they decided to investigate me for my social media activities. So, but anyway, because their policy, they
well, you
changed.
could claim that you were encouraged. I mean, not just to change a policy, but you were actually encouraged to think that you could just treat a private
That
social
was that
media.
was that was our that was our case. That was our case before the arbitrator.
Uh, and,
And arbitrator David Philip Jones
yeah.
didn't hear this at all. He didn't hear. He said there was no evidence, even though evidence was presented to him 3 times. He said there's no evidence that MRU's policies didn't cover social media.
Hmm.
Hmm. So that's gonna, I think, is gonna be part of the appeal. I hope it is, but it depends on the union. Anyway, that decision is just a disaster, because although David Philip Jones claims he read all these reports, he doesn't seem to have read them very carefully, because I've documented all the problems. I sent it to Cout, a list of all the errors that
Yeah.
were in the arbitration decision. I don't know if they're going to be pursuing that.
Well,
See,
I
that's
spoke to David Robinson, and I think he said he sounded kind of sympathetic on about that. I mean that he just thought that there there wasn't an opportunity to cross-examine on those sorts of points, or something like
well, what happened in that is that the arbitrator just didn't. The evidence was presented to him.
yeah
He just didn't seem to take it in. Um, I don't know why. Like it's either, like we had so much information. That's the other problem, right? Is we had so much information that we were dealing with. The other thing too, which was a real failure of David Philip Jones, is he did not force Mount Royal to particularize its case. So we never actually found out what MRU's case was until January 16th, 2024, 2 months after the arbitration was over. That's when they finally stated what their case was. And they should have had to do that at the beginning.
yeah.
Now, why he didn't do that, I don't know either.
Huh.
And it caused us serious problems, him not doing that. Because, just as an example, with the case of Gabrielle Weaselhead, MRU basically just said, go look at the investigation reports. That was their particulars. Like, look at the investigation reports. In the case of Gabrielle Weaselhead, the investigator, Nadia Rent, said that what was harassing were tweets that specifically mentioned Gabrielle what she was called Lindstrom in that time. That was her married name.
Yeah.
But it wasn't clear what mentioning meant. Did that mean tagging? Did that mean having an attachment which had Gabrielle Lindstrom's name circled? What was that? Anyway, so we looked at every single tweet that had any possibility of mentioning Lindstrom. And this caused a very confused day of questioning of Gabrielle Lindstrom, Gabrielle Weaselhead, because we had to go through tons and tons of tweets. In the end, MRU said it was only 2 tweets that they thought were harassing. They said this in either October or November 2023 when I was on the stand, because I was mentioning this point that I didn't quite know what was meant by mentioning Gabrielle Lindstrom. And then the lawyer for MRU said, I think it's only these two tweets, because that's after you blocked Lindstrom, because it was blocking her on when she blocked me on Twitter. That anything that I tried to do after she blocked me was seen as being harassing. Um, so, but that was never stated at all in any of the up until October or November 2023.
Yeah.
So MRU should have had to say it's these two tweets in the beginning. And then we would have prepared our case according to those particulars.
Yeah.
But we didn't, it just totally, it made everything, it disadvantaged us, seriously disadvantaged us.
Like if you had known it was just about those two tweets, you could have
Yeah.
just gone to town on that. Yeah.
Yeah. But we couldn't. We had to drag all these tweets. It was a mess. The cross-examination of Lindstrom was a disaster because there was all these tweets. It was really confusing because we had like 50 tweets that we were going through trying to get Lindstrom to acknowledge that she had mentioned or that she saw this tweet, or like, oh, what a disaster. And if we just had the two, we could have, first of all, it would have taken much less time, would have taken 15 minutes instead of, the whole day to go through it.
But he did find that you were wrongfully dismissed, right?
Yeah. That was the on the positive side, that was a good, but I really don't think he could have, because the people who harassed me were given a letter of warning. And I was given a 2-week suspension. So what was the
by the same? No, those were two separate investigators, though, right?
No, well, it's the administration determines
The administration, right? Okay.
They determine the discipline. So so that couldn't be explained. When it was, they wanted to go after me. They wanted to give me a serious iron fist treatment. What they didn't expect was when I got the finding about social media, because I didn't know that social media was covered.
Yeah.
I filed 17 complaints against my colleagues.
Oh, right.
So now they were stuck, right? Because they had to do
But then you were found to be guilty of what, frivolous complaint, or
that was number 18. The 18th complaint, because I was found to be frivolous and vexatious, which was another setup.
Well, that's interesting because I sort of wondered if somebody was making a frivolous or vexatious complaint against me, because there's an incentive to be to skate on thin ice that way, because if you want to portray someone as harassing, you want to show a pattern of conduct, and therefore, somebody mentioned that I had published an article in a journal in the States where the word Indigenous had not been capitalized.
That was Renee. That was one of Renee Watchman's allegations.
Yeah. But my response to that was, I let the editor follow best American practices in that journal, and I didn't, but in the future I'll try to, insist that foreign editors follow AU's, if that is AU's policy. I'll ask editors in the future in foreign journals to capitalize it. Just trying to be nice about it. Which, but and they said, well, this and they also added, and this is part of your pattern of harming Indigenous people.
Yeah. So again, like the academic freedom covers that, right? So
Yeah.
whether you want to capitalize or not capitalize, that's your scholarly response, and it is grammatically correct to use the word Indigenous in a smaller.
Yeah, especially if you're using
letter.
settler and white person in small and
If
all
you
the
have
other.
Cree, if you have Cree, which is a group, you capitalize Cree,
Yeah.
but Indigenous is the generic as an adjective. So that's that to me is the correct English usage. And the fact that some activist wants a capitalized thing because they think that signals some kind of respect or whatever for Indigenous people. That's nonsensical.
Yeah.
But the fact that I say that is nonsensical is now harassment because I'm now belittling like the person who is saying the person's viewpoint that it's somehow respect for like this is again it's the ideas should be it's not harassment at all. Even if you're being very um, vitriolic about the ideas, saying this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard of, blah, 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 blah. That's not harassment. What's harassment is targeting an individual, insulting them personally, making personal comments about them which have nothing to do with the ideas at all, etc. That's when we're going to get into that. Usually it's got some intimidation, some power differentials and blah, blah. Like this is anyway, but we're no further ahead, thanks to David Philip Jones, in our understanding of harassment than we were before, because the 4 investigators hired by MRU, 3 of them who investigated me, and 1 of them who investigated the 17, which Michael Ford, the lawyer for MRU, referred to as the Gang of 17.
Oh, who is that? Michael.
Michael Ford, who is MRU's lawyer.
Oh, MRU. He referred to them as the Gang of 17.
Yeah.
I always thought that was your term.
No, no. It was the lawyer for
That
MRU's
is
term.
funny.
It was. The hilarious thing is that, and this was part of the union allowing me to be defamed behind the scenes, is that a union meeting a number of months ago, some faculty members were accusing me of inventing this Gang of 17 label
Wow.
because I wanted to draw a parallel, according to them, between the 17 and the Gang of 4 in the Chinese Cultural Revolution. That's what they claimed. But first of all, I'm not an expert in Chinese politics. I don't know anything about the Gang of 4. Like I was unaware of that situation. I knew there was this kind of Maoist kind of thing and blah blah
Well, one
blah.
of them was Mao's wife or widow, yeah.
Yeah,
And
but I was unaware of the Gang of 4, so that
well,
was
what
not.
happened to the Gang of Four? I guess they
Uh,
were just pushed out of power, I guess,
I think they're under house arrest. I know Mao's wife was given some kind of house arrest kind of thing. I think some of them might have been executed if I'm not wrong, but they definitely were imprisoned.
Wow.
But anyway, I'm in this meeting. People are accusing me of calling this group the Gang of 17 when it was Michael Ford who called them the Gang of 17. And then everyone just adopted his terminology. I'm perfectly happy for them to be called the Gang of 17 because they were part of the mob that tried to take me down. But I didn't use I first of all I wasn't on the stand until October. So I
But
had
I mean, let's suppose that you were magically fully reinstated. I mean, what would you do differently?
I do lots of things differently. So
I mean,
on
I
social
would say that the knock against you would be, you got to be more selective, keep your powder dry, and pick your fights.
well I see one of the problems that I was having was I thought that the university was much more salvageable. Like I thought I could get it back on track. I was
Yeah.
trying to I was trying to jolt it into its academic side. I now realize the problem is a lot more systemic and everything than I realized. So, first of all, the social media, I will not, I will not mention any member of the MRU community on social media. If someone mentions me, I'm going to go right away to the union and the authorities and say, here's the situation. I want a mediation right now with this person. That's what I'm going to do. In meetings, what I used to do is I used to ask very, very insistent I used to keep on asking follow-up questions.
Well, one of the things I noticed is that I don't know if it was Dwayne Brad or who it was, but somebody, I don't want to mention that name because I don't know who it was, but somebody said uh, that you would take up like a lot of time in like 45% of the meeting time, or something like that. I mean, does that sound credible, or
It's
no?
not. So I'm
Or
currently
a disproportionate amount of time, let's put
so
it
the
that.
problem is that I was noticeable because I was the only dissenting voice.
Oh, right.
So every time I would raise a question, everyone would bristle and like not like it and not want me to be raising these points at all. So it was like a psychological kind of bias against me. I'm currently doing a documentary now on the March 5th, 2021 Arts Faculty Council meeting. So this is the famous meeting that kept on being resurrected as a way of saying that the employment relationship was no longer viable, even though I was exonerated by the investigator about it. They kept on bringing it up, and then they brought it up in the arbitration hearing, and I had all these testimony about this meeting, and we had a video of it. MRU had a video of it, so we all watched the video, and everything that was said by the dean and Joe Anderson and Mary Lee Mulholland, the two people talking about in the arbitration, was found to be not true. So like they've got a dislike for my viewpoint. They don't think I should be expressing it. They do everything they can to shut me down. And then they play victim and say that I'm the one who's doing all this to other people. Like it's just like it's a iron law of woke projection where you accuse people of doing the things that you're doing. Uh,
Yeah, I know. I even in my sort of brief brush with, potential trouble, um, I mean, I would ask myself, who is harassing whom? I mean, harassment is when you target an individual,
yeah,
and yet most of the things I did that people were prone to complain about, I wasn't even mentioning any names. I mean, I just,
I know. Well, this is the thing: is that because you're a white male
yeah,
and the person complaining against you was an Indigenous woman,
yeah, yeah,
you are automatically uh, someone who's a kind of an oppressor, and therefore the standards are going to apply differently to
yeah,
you.
yeah,
This was quite evident from my case because we had all these investigation reports, the ones that were when I was investigated, the ones when I was investigating other people, the standard was completely opposite in those three, well, four cases because there's the Gang of 17, the quote unquote Gang of 17, and Tim Haney, who's number 18, which that was the frivolous and vexatious one. And then the Lindstrom Dirks watch, those standards were very, very, and even amongst those three, they were different. So we needed David Philip Jones to sort that out for us, to figure out what the standard was under the law for harassment. And he didn't do that at all. And that was a massive failure. And we paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this. And he didn't do his job. So we're back to we're back to
So you
square
would
one.
characterize his basic failure as a failure to sort out the standards for harassment, or?
That was one of the failures. Was that there was all the procedural grievances that he dismissed, which again were so now you got to go through. I had to go through investigations without getting the complaint, which is like under procedural fairness is not should not happen. He didn't seem to care about that. Redacted investigation reports. You have to get your investigation report is redacted, so you can't see the rationale. In many cases, you can't get the whole picture.
So he redacted them, or
Uh, no, the MRU did.
oh, right, okay.
I got them unredacted in arbitration.
Oh, okay.
So I had to get fired before I could see the case against me. So that shouldn't have been a like. I don't think in a set in a procedurally fair natural justice environment this would make sense. But for some reason, Cout doesn't think that should be appealed, which is to me seems to be a disaster. Anyway, so like that, there's all sorts of problems with that decision. The one good thing was he found that I'd been wrongfully terminated, which I guess is the biggest. You know, I guess that's the biggest success. Like he couldn't have, it couldn't have been a better result in terms of that.
Yeah.
But still, there's a lot of huge problems that still need to be sorted out. But because of the union, I got to go. I got to get the union
So what is it that Cout doesn't think should be appealed again? That you've already told me.
procedural. It doesn't think that procedural grievances should be appealed, and it doesn't think that the discipline for harassment should be appealed. It only is appealing the reinstatement, lack of reinstatement, which is not, for me, is not acceptable. Well, for me, the harassment is the biggest issue because people are still saying that I harassed people when I did not harass people.
Yeah, I see what you mean. But they're not bothering to appeal. I mean, they're basically saying, well, maybe she did deserve to get suspended for 2 weeks. And
Well, no, they say I deserve to get a letter of reprimand. So that's what Jones gave me. Jones said I should get a letter of reprimand. But I shouldn't have got a letter of reprimand. I should have got someone telling me, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. And them talking to other people too, like all the Michael Trusello calling me a pathetic racist, that I want to go hang out with white supremacists. That one. There should have been some counseling about that as well.
oh, that's as bad as anything you've said, or worse maybe.
But like the standard is not equal.
Yeah, I mean, calling somebody a white supremacist must be at least as bad as calling somebody a race hustler. Unless they really are a white supremacist.
I don't know. I think like my own view before I got dragged into all of this was, if it's defamation, you go to, this is social media, so no one is obligated to be on social media.
Yeah.
So if I go and meet, some Gabrielle Weasel Head in the grocery store, and I say something really nasty to her, then we're not at work. So whatever. If as soon as I go to work and I do something now, okay, I'm accountable. But if I'm just in my, and that's what social media is like. And this is crazy for MRU to be involved in this. And it didn't want to be involved in this. It wasn't going to be involved in this. But the union forced its hand to become involved because it wanted to defend Gabrielle Weaselhead and DA Dirks, and it forced MRU to go after me. It got MRU to change its policies without telling everyone, so that I could be pursued and have these really draconian disciplinary measures imposed upon me. So anyway, Mark, I noticed that it's getting close to 10 after, which is 10 minutes overtime. So I hope that makes things a bit more clear as to what has happened with my case.
Yeah.
But it's a mess. It's a huge mess.
Yeah.
Because
well, the inconsistency on the social media front.
That's right.
Yeah. Where the union or the university wasn't going to get involved, but then the union forced the matter. Yeah.
That's what happened, as far as I can, just connecting the dots.
Oh, but there is a leading legal case that involves Facebook, right? I mean,
for the government.
Right?
Yeah. Like it was a government employee.
Oh, maybe.
we supposedly have our freedom of expression rights protected by the collective agreement, which one would think would be, social media activities.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem to be the case. Anyway, well, Mark, this has been very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, we scratched the surface about a few things. Uh, went into the case in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I'm a little more aware. Well,
But I have done a lot of videos on my case.
yeah.
Unfortunately, the four documents that are the most important, the most important next to the arbitration decision, which are the final submissions of MRU and the union and the replies to those final submissions, the union has told me that these are all confidential and cannot be posted. So we're gonna have to wait on those ones. And this is really, for me, is a real hard pill to swallow, because we only know what the only place where the case is actually recorded are in the January 16th, 2024 submissions. That's the only place you can find the case
Oh, so
itself.
when do they become public, did you say, or when?
I guess after the appeal is done,
Hmm.
unfortunately, because it's just that to me those are the most important documents of all of them.
And do you have a timeline for how those, or those two appeals, I guess? Or,
Yeah, so well, me with this duty of fair representation complaint, um, that that's going to probably cause a bit of a sand in the machinery for the other one. I don't know. All I'm saying is this all has to be looked at now. This isn't working. This
yeah.
system is not working because the union is captured and is not able to fairly represent both sides of this dispute. And so we need to have other things being looked at besides just what the union is going to be going to do. And this is going to take a lot of time. And that's fine as long as I'm able to talk about it. Because then now I can explain to people and I can defend myself. Because that's the other problem is I've got all these people talking in union meetings and I'm not allowed to go there. And this is and as well, I should mention something we didn't talk about. The union's under criminal investigation.
Oh, but that has, oh, that's from something separate, presumably. I
No,
mean,
they one of the board members filed a complaint against the grievance officer for defending me and saying I'd been ganged up on by a number of faculty members. So that's a shocking thing in its own right. So that's part of the whole thing against the union. Is what went on there with the attempts to intimidate the grievance officer, the one person who was trying to defend me in the union. So there's another kind of shocking.
oh, so somebody accused the grievance officer of,
Harassment
oh, no, what? So why did that trigger a criminal investigation? That was,
because they were interfering in a judicial proceeding because of all it's still as a judicial proceeding because of the appeals and so on that are
oh,
happening.
right. Okay.
And they're intimidating a witness. Yeah. And this is EDI. So it's not so much about the individuals. It's about equity, diversity, and inclusion as a political belief that results in discrimination against people who don't hold that belief. And that's what it all comes down to. And we need to get rid of the equity, diversity, and inclusion types of initiatives that are.
Well, what do you think of University of Alberta changing its language? Did you hear about that?
Yes, I think that it's good in the sense that it's a recognition that there's a problem,
Yeah.
and it's bad in the sense that the way he's redefining them or the new words seem to be the same words, just kind of slightly, when we just need to take it out. Stop talking about community and belonging and just get rid of it. We don't need it. It's a counter force. It's an actual weight on the system. So that's my fear, is that it's just an attempt to kind of do this massaging of language rather than addressing the problem. Anyway, Mark, I don't want to overtax our audience members. We've gone over 2 hours.
Yeah. All right.
So I really appreciate you coming on the Rational Space Disputations. I hope that we have drilled down a little bit onto a number of these matters, but obviously it just is a never-ending kind of thing, a bunch of ideas to be, trying to be probing. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.